Hi, I'm David Manty with Cannabis Equipment News, and with me today is Leslie Engelking, founder and president of Cannabis Health and Safety Organization, Focus, and Rachel Herndon, chief operating officer with Delta Extraction. Thank you both very much for joining me today.
Thank you so much for having us.
So, Leslie, I'd like to start with you. We've talked and worked with each other in the past, most recently kind of unraveling what's going on in Missouri. So, what happened in Missouri today when it comes to everything wrapped around Delta Extraction?
So nothing yet, I guess is the answer. But overall, the reason today, October 20th, is important is because the Department of Cannabis Regulation, or DCR, has stated that they will make some sort of decision today. So all this started back in August 2nd. And since then, Delta hasn't been able to be in their facilities. They haven't been able to make products, sell products, that kind of stuff. So they've been looking forward to this date for a long time because there's going to finally be some resolution, whatever that might look like. But Rach, I think you should kind of talk about your perspective on this a little too, because it's definitely different.
And Leslie, she nailed it. Delta is expecting action from the state today, hoping to see something. That it's been almost 12 weeks of suspended operations. We can't even access our building without DCR holding our hand right now. But we do expect the license to be revoked today. But finally having action after almost 12 weeks allows Delta to pursue and expand their next steps. This isn't the end of it. If anything, this is just the beginning.
So what happened? Was it just the next day the doors were locked and the employees were told to go home?
It was an absolutely wild journey. I work for several licensees. I know most of the industry from my career. I was on the phone actively with our compliance officer on Friday. She was aware of our processes. She knew what was going on. We did a huge run right before the rule change that weekend. And then Tuesday, they suspended us. And it was closed doors, stop everything.
Was there any warning or any indication that this might happen, or did they kind of catch you blindsided?
There was no warning. There were some rumors going on. So we had reached out on Thursday and we're like, hey, what's going on? They're like, no, everything's great.
Really?
Obviously not. They didn't start an investigation until a few weeks later. We figured that out from the discovery, from the litigation that's going on. From the investigation that is now happening after the fact, it's very clear that they were chasing what was an anonymous tip from what turned out to be one of our competitors. And they were on a wild goose chase and they found ducks. And they found ducks that they knew about. They have correspondence with all their COs. They knew about all of this.
I think I can add a little bit here on just the fact that, so what the state appears to be trying to do is stop any kind of hemp-derived cannabinoids from coming into the program. But rather than writing a straightforward rule about that, they have put it in different places, some effectively, some not. There's definitely loopholes. But they're trying to kind of do a gotcha versus hey, what's going on? How does this work? What's the understanding? And I think the biggest challenge in this situation that's so specific to Missouri is that they actually approve SOPs. So when Delta writes an SOP or any other licensee in the state, they submit it to their compliance officer who oversees their activities, and they go back and forth on email or by phone and agree what this means. Everybody understands it. It's approved. They can use it. It's a very arduous process. That is a lot of work for the state. And so you can understand why maybe they don't know what they're seeing, right? If they're looking at every SOP for every operation, I can personally tell you, because that's what we do for clients, it's a huge job. And my team is trained to do nothing else but that. So being able to say, for Delta to be able to say, hey, we are doing this. We told the state this. This is, to me, why this case is important for the industry as a whole, because they followed the rules and are still going through all of this.
That's the part that really confuses me. So I looked at the dossier. After further review, there's nothing harmful or hazardous found in the distillate produced by Delta Extraction. I mean, does the entire situation boil down to clerical or a compliance error?
I am actively arguing this entire situation boils down to rules that the division chose not to promulgate. They have an opportunity every month to promulgate new emergency rules, and they have not. new rules went into effect on July 31st. They obviously have been thinking about THCA, but they didn't think about how to create a program that doesn't allow this. And the thing is, like, I know it's impossible. Like, DCR has less than 100 employees there. It is impossible for them to read every SOP of the almost 400 licensees in the state. And they've said more than once, they're like, we don't approve SOPs, which on the flip side, from Discovery, we see that there's active engagement and conversations about the SOPs. From conversations I've had with our CO, I have an email from them that said, thank you. You covered all the points that we wanted to know. I had no reason at any point in time to ever go back to my operational team and tell them to make any changes. We never had any issues with any inspection. It would be so much easier if this was a cut and dry compliance issue, but I've got nothing until they suspended us.
Yeah, so that's what doesn't make sense to me, is that they approve everything you're doing, then a competitor comes in with a hot tip, and all of a sudden they shut you down. I just feel like there has to be more checks and balances in place before the lights are shut off.
Absolutely. Every other regulatory entity that I'm aware of has something called due process. I thought that was a thing, and it's incredible to me that the industry as a whole in Missouri allowed the regulatory framework, the rules that are currently promulgated, to come into effect. There were tons of conversations amongst the industry about filing an injunction, because one of the biggest things that raised eyebrows wasn't just like this packaging debate and all that. DCR literally has a Bureau of Investigations now, and there's no program oversight there other than what exists in the rest of the Constitution. And it's unprecedented. It's unique in Missouri. I've been around the regulatory and government and political realm for a minute. This is weird. And this is a really good example as to why a good program matters. This is a really good example as to why just competency and experience matters. It seems like sometimes that regulators or that our industry as a whole feels like they exist in DCR's vacuum. And that's just not true. There's still the federal government, there's still local government, there's still every other aspect of government, and it all still applies to every operation, as your readers know. This is a very confusing situation, and it didn't have to be this way. They've had every opportunity to clarify and promulgate an effective program, and the industry allowed this program to go into effect, and this is what we're seeing as a result of it. Delta's experience is a symptom of a weak program.
Leslie.
I want to add stuff here, because this is not, while this is specific to Missouri, and this convoluted situation with Delta is definitely about Missouri rules, the cannabis industry as a whole has been developed really differently than any other industry in the sense of the supply chain, right? And some of that is completely understandable. It's federally illegal. It can't cross state lines. So things are going to be different. But the main difference in how it's regulated is that in food or beverage or pharmacy or supplements or any of these other industries that are CPG and very similar to cannabis, the regulatory agency actually monitors the process, right? That's what they mandate, that they meet standards, that they follow certain processes, that they validate what they're doing so that they know that the outcomes are safe. And that doesn't really happen in cannabis. Instead, everybody makes their products, they send it to a lab, and then they wait to find out what the magic lab says, like an magic 8-ball or something, It makes no sense. If you're a small grower and you have 3 harvests a year and you send one out and it fails, where are you, right? So controlling the processes and all that. And so I think that part of what the situation with Delta in Missouri really brought to light, and you can see this from some of the comments that DCR put out in response to consumer questions about, are these products safe or not? Are any of these products safe? I think this issue has really gotten to the heart of testing can't be the only way we assure safety in products, right? We've got to get there. And if DCR was mandating and regulating processes, they would have to understand them. And so reading an SOP that said, I'm bringing in THCA, I'm using this as an ingredient, it's going in here, would have been understood and either addressed immediately or not approved.
Yeah. So on that, Rachel, I wanted to ask, So what about those allegations about, quote, duping operators with THC oil that was derived from hemp and putting it into products?
Right. And David, I've got a soapbox about this one because if anything, I take it very personally because we were so open. Delta was duped. The industry was duped. Delta was duped when regulators said Delta was good to go on Friday. The industry was duped when regulators refused to promulgate rules that gave them authority to regulate anything involving this investigation. JCAR, I don't know if you saw the JCAR hearing on Wednesday where DCR leaders were pulled before the legislative committee on oversight, and they were asked, what is this guidance? Like JCAR was duped when DCR told them that guidance is not being used as a rule when we can see that as operators every single day. Operators continue to be duped every day whenever other operators continue to use the same processes, and they continue to refuse to file clear functional rules. Operators continue, and operators in general continue to be duped by DCR. And there's a lot of information that has been provided, we presume, by people who work at the state to the media in Missouri, because there is blood in the water. We're trying to figure out what's going on. Since the conception of this program, the media here has wanted to know what's going on, and the information that they've been given has been driving additional duping because, like we discussed earlier, they were investigating a tip that was not accurate at all. Regulators have continued to provide incomprehensible information during their goose chase. If you look at the recall, it doesn't make sense. It frustrates the crap out of my lawyers. The guidance that they issued this week also confuses my lawyers. It says 3 different things. It's not comprehensible. That's where I see duping. And it's really concerning because the more that this narrative is pushed, the more liability it puts us at. And that's not fair. We were told from day one that we were good. We were told the Friday before we were suspended that we were good. Our testing shows a safe product. And as your readers know, it's all the same plant. And this was THC. I'm happy to provide COAs. We've gone on the record before, we're an open book. We had good, clean processes. We had one of the most brilliant chemists I've ever seen the resume of review everything that we've done. I don't know how we duped anyone, but I do feel very duped as an operational leader.
Leslie, talking about this from a regulatory perspective, we've seen this in other states where there are issues that come up with the regulation and whether or not they're confusing or potentially duping operators. In your opinion, is it because some of these programs are pushed through too quickly, or what is causing sort of this problem on both ends?
That's like a mountain of a question.
Well, that's fine. We'll just get halfway.
But I'll take a stab at it. So, yeah, I think most of this just boils down to the speed obviously matters, right? And in the early days when things were passed by voter initiative and they put a six-month timeline on the state to get something done, that's problematic. If you want something done well, take the time to do it right, set it up, and then, reiterate different iterations of it later, like fix it. But this doesn't happen in cannabis. So I do think that the time is part of it. But I also think speed is part of it in the sense of the marketplace wanting to grow and the entrepreneurship and all that. So one of the things that happens in Missouri that is not, that I haven't seen in the 31 states I've worked in, let's say that, they use a system called LeafLink, which is a technology platform. Rachel can probably explain it better than I do, but, and that's how they buy and sell wholesale products from each other, right? So if somebody's buying distillate from Delta, they're buying it on LeafLink. They give them, well, LeafLink doesn't require contracts or supplier agreements through there. So if you're a food company and you're going to buy something, you have a vendor or a supplier that you're buying something, you say, okay, I need my ingredients that I'm buying from you to meet these standards so that I know my products are safe. Well, there's none of that in Missouri. The other thing is those supplier agreements are what you fall back on when something goes wrong. So in this case, DCR, had pulled these products some of the companies that Delta works with and makes products for are having issues, and it's created this issue between them. If there had been a supplier agreement, that would have addressed all of this, right? And so I think that the industry is being duped a little bit by trying to simplify some of this stuff. It's complicated. I mean, I've said that forever, and I hate that it's complicated. If there was a way to make it simple, I would. But when I see simple solutions like that, it's usually a cut corner, and that shows up later, something like this. And I don't know LeafLink's technology. I'm not trying to pick on them specifically at all, just to be clear. I don't, but that's a great system because it allows everybody to trade quickly until something goes wrong, and then it's a problem. And I think that we've got a lot of those type of issues across the industry, not just in this particular specific instance.
Rachel, you're part of a larger investment group with other interests in cannabis. I'm sure that you're involved with the larger cannabis industry in the state. What are you hearing from your peers regarding how this situation impacts their businesses? And is it cultivating, a sense of instability within the state's cannabis industry as a result?
Oh, absolutely. Like, not only is the industry as a whole unstable, operators are frustrated and they're scared. I've been discussing, it seems like since the beginning. I have a really good network. I cannot think of a single facility in this state that DCR couldn't walk into and suspend for whatever they want. Based on the reaches and overreach that they made with us, they can use that same twisted justification for anything else with anyone else. And it's been a rush to compliance, which is causing even more confusion. Like, do you need 20 cameras in a 40 by 40 bowl? Or do you need 2? Because regulations say 2, but regulations also say you need 2 camera angles on every single package. But what if it's in a box? DCR can't even clarify that one. And then they issue guidance, which goes beyond rules, and they say it's trying to provide additional aid. But whenever your CO goes to your facility, you need to use that guidance as rule. Then there's no reason to do otherwise. It's a very uncertain time in the Missouri market. It's very in flux, and it's concerning. And I really do hope that that Delta's experience will lead to a better industry. I think the industry as a whole and regulators have learned a lot of lessons. I really hope regulators have learned about due process and proper ways to conduct investigations, especially whenever you're dealing with massive businesses. This might be our industry as a whole is less than 5 years old, and Delta did $20 million in sales in 18 months. That's a huge business, and it deserves respect. Each of those employees that has been laid off deserves respect. Our partners deserve the respect of a better program and just clarity. And on the flip side, I understand that DCR has less than 100 employees, and they promulgated this huge program, but they promulgated the program. They created the staffing needs. It's okay to gear up. And like, whenever we look at other markets, you see the programs evolve and change and adapt. That's appropriate. And then you also see other regulators, they work together. Missouri was not the first state. Missouri does not exist in a vacuum. And it feels sometimes like regulators think we do, as if this hasn't been done in other states, as if our own processes aren't done every day in every other market. And that's what's wild, is there is experience, there are resources, whether it's Focus or others, to draw from. It doesn't have to be like this.
Agreed. I think that's one of the issues that is symptomatic of a state by state legalization, is it winds up becoming these little fiefdoms. Rachel, what's that? I'm sorry.
I like the word fiefdom for this.
One thing that this issue is one of the many elephants in the room are the 63,000 products, right, that were put on hold with an estimated market value of I've saw figures of up to $30 million worth of product. What's going to happen to that product?
I really hope we find out more today, because I will say, before all this happened, the industry was not stable. There are mom and pop dispensaries who have a quarter of their vault locked up. Mm-hmm. And that's not fair. They're sitting on that money. They need that money. They need to sell the product to pay their employees. This is normal business. We're all just selling boxes. These boxes just have metric tags on them. I can't wait to find out, David. I really can't, because it's so funny, because on one hand, if the product, and it's not all Delta products, just to be clear, we worked for several different brands. We did white labeling. We had many different partnerships. And obviously that's part of the reason why we grew so big so fast.
So you have a bunch of products that you've white labeled with other companies. Yeah.
So on one hand, if DCR says that this isn't Missouri marijuana, just let us have it. Like if they think it's some crazy Frankennoid with no testing, let us have it. We'll go sell it at the gas station down the street. And to be clear, that's a joke. We're not going to do that. Do not sue us for that. Do not. But on the flip side, they're not going to do that because they know every single one of those products does have Missouri cannabis in it, and it does have Missouri licensed cannabis in it. That was the entire point. And then there were cannabis additives, obviously, and that's what we're all talking about. In the regs, there's no cap on additives. There's no regulation on additives. Whether you're talking about CBD or THCA, there is no clear rule. There is no clear guidance. But at the end of the day, if they say it's not a regulated product, let it all go. Let it go. Let them sell those boxes. Let's take the metric tag off.
What's going to happen to go ahead, Leslie.
Sorry. Yeah. I just want to say that Rachel's point is important because everything's on hold here. So like there's always competing priorities. And for me, my priority is always the health and safety aspect, right? That's what I'm committed to in this space. But we've seen that these products have tested according to Missouri testing standards and passed. We've seen, in process and the end. The states even released some of them over the last few days. We didn't know about it in advance. It just kind of, things were showing up in metric that had been on this hold or recalled. Rachel, you may know more about it than I do as far as like why certain things were released and others, but like it's confusing overall, right? Because now this is more confusing for the industry. It's more confusing for the customers and patients because the product was pulled, then it was recalled. Now some has been released, some hasn't. Why different times? These kind of things are so critically important for states to get right. The timing of this, the way that this is rolled out. And I feel like that's one of the things, that hasn't really been managed well in this situation. It seems like just from the way things have gone that it was like, oh, we saw something, we're going to go get it. Right. And catch them, which is fine if you have systems in place for what happens after that. But like Rachel said, DCR has recently hired a whole bunch of people. They've put a new oversight investigations branch together. Those people are just getting going. They don't have their processes. And so Delta's been sort of stuck in the middle of this building phase of DCR. And I think that's been a real problem too. And it is, no matter how much it impacts businesses, their job is to make sure that it's not confusing for the public and consumers too. And that has not happened here. This has been the most confusing situation. Focus has fielded hundreds of calls from people in Missouri asking, what's going on? What is this? We need to do better. And I think that the way we do better is do it the opposite of how this was handled, right? Let's talk to each other. If we think something might be up, let's ask, let's work through it. Let's explain things. If they're doing something they're not supposed to do, okay, show me where, let's change it, submit this, and let's go forward. If we do it again, yeah, there's a big enforcement priority, but this is a brand new industry. Operators are learning every day. Regulators are learning every day. If we're not working together to get better, nobody's getting better. We're just fighting, right? And so we have to think about progress and overall improvement of the industry as a whole, not just as like this day-to-day thing. And I think that to me, that's one of the reasons that I've been talking about this situation, because there is a big gap there right now in state cannabis programs and how they're run. Absolutely.
And just to add on that, I want to talk about the admin hold lift and then it coming back in and the confusion involving the recalls. It was so interesting because Friday I log on to Metric and all the administrative hold numbers had changed for every single license that we work with. I start getting calls from our dispensary partners, from our MIP partners, the ones that we worked with, because we did a ton of business, all just being confused. This was initially done with no further information from the state. And what it's doing is this ripple effect where it's building additional consternation at the retail level and at the consumer level because of all this confusion. I've got IC coordinators who will never trust us again because they don't understand what's going on. They read the guidance from the state and it doesn't tell them anything. It took the state a week to issue guidance regarding the holds that they had lifted, which are still incredibly inconsistent. And I don't want to get us in trouble here and get anything relocked up or unlocked or what have you, but it still doesn't make sense. We still have the recall notice has broken links at this point. The product list it's hard to decipher. And whenever you have, there's about 200 dispensaries in Missouri. If you have the IC coordinators taking a full hour at the beginning of each of their shifts to figure out what is administratively held that day, it's very frustrating because at the end of the day, whenever you're a retailer and on the retail side, it's you sell what you have. If there's no administrative hold, why wouldn't they sell it? By creating more consternation and more confusion, I feel like they're setting our partners and our peers up for failure. Because at when is DCR going to turn around and hit every single one of them with saying that they've sold recalled products, whenever the state has time and again said there's been no adverse reactions? And that's what really sucks is like we have testing for when it came in, when all the product came in, we tested it during production. It's obviously tested in final form. It's in our best interest to create safe products. That's what we want to do. Quality is very, very important to us. We consume our own products every single day, and we're proud to do so. But this culture of consternation holds the industry back because it prevents operations from investing in their workforce. It prevents them from investing in professional development because it holds it all back. It creates culture problems where it just wasn't necessary. And like Leslie said, it can be better and it should be better. Like Missouri has over 16,000 people working in this state and they're proud to work here, whether they're a bud tender who's find me another retail position where they're making more than a bud tender in Missouri. Like find it for me. I would love to know. It's amazing to see how this has changed lives and brought people from just every aspect and walk of life together. And it's a beautiful thing to see. And it's also heartbreaking to see just it kind of fall apart and to see people scared to do their jobs.
Speaking of the people, what has happened to your 18 employees at Delta? Have they just been stuck in a limbo? Are they working elsewhere? What happened after everything was shut down?
Delta employees were laid off. Most of them have found other jobs. As I'm sure all your readers know, like manufacturing facilities are factories. A lot of them are hourly. We're talking jobs that are $35,000 to $50,000, $60,000 a year. They work for a living. So they've had to find somewhere else to work for a living. I've seen some of them have like found jobs at dispensaries, and that's so great to hear because I've heard nothing but great things. I've seen them around town at different restaurants. And the thing that really strikes a nerve for me is they're all so hopeful and they really want to get back to work. They're proud of the company that they worked for. They're a family, and that's beautiful to see. It's kind of an operational headache sometimes, but I want them to have that pride. I want them to be tight. And that's what we did. We created a really wonderful workplace. I hate companies and corporations that say we're just like a family, but they're tight. And seeing them have to go find new ways to work is scary because it creates more uncertainty. Like they might be excited to come back to Delta if and when it ever operates again. But why would their families be excited for them to go back to Delta? Why would their families want them to go back into the Missouri cannabis industry whenever it's this uncertain? Especially in a time when globally, from the local level all the way up to the planet, everything's uncertain.
Rachel, what do you think Delta will ever open again?
Unsure, and like it's kind of funny. My answer to that question changes every hour because that's how uncertain the climate is just in general. Delta's journey is definitely not over. Everyone who's involved, I would expect to see continue to be in the industry in some way, shape, or form. The legal battle is not going to stop anytime soon. That's going to continue on for a very long time. Delta will never look the same again. I presume someday there will be that building will open its doors again. And I will be so excited to see it, but it won't be the same company. It will not be the same company that's doing $50 million a year. It won't be the same company that I was projecting to do $100 million next year. It won't. And honestly, that's okay, but it's a shame. It really is.
Leslie, one of the most difficult things for me in this entire situation is that I try and look at these situations and try and figure out what the industry can learn going forward so that way we can prevent it from happening again. And this is one of those situations where I'm not sure. How would you answer that?
So I think, there's so much to learn. Literally I have learned so much from this situation, and this is all the stuff I deal with every day, and I'm still learning. So I think there's tons of lessons, but if we're talking about sort of a global, like what can the licensees and operators learn? I think it's the importance of documenting what you do, right? Part of the reason that this happening at this specific time is so curious in Missouri is because on the same day or the day before they came in and into Delta's operations, these new rules are going into effect where all these licensees have to build a quality management system. A quality management system, by definition, would have had controls over all of these activities that are happening in this facility, not just what ingredients are being used, but who they're buying the ingredients from, who they're partnering with, how they're partnering with them, what they're doing with materials that don't agree with each other's standards, like all sorts of things. And so it's very interesting to me that we went after this right when they're trying to implement this sort of first in the country approach to really giving quality of cannabis over towards third parties. And I think it tells me they don't necessarily understand quality management and what that looks like, because this sort of flies in the face of that, right? If everybody in the industry has to build a quality system, that industry is going to look so different next year. There will be supplier agreements between all these companies, whether they use some online technology or not. There will be checks and balances from the compliance part that says, yeah, we did what we said we were going to do. We have the output data here. So I guess long way of saying all that, but I think that one thing the industry can learn is that buttoning up your operations, building quality, documenting processes is only to your advantage, whether a state requires it or not. I can tell you, I'm working closely with Delta and all of their operations to make sure that everything is perfectly in line and everything, all the I's and T's and that kind of stuff, because it could happen to anybody. And I don't want to give the idea that like DCR is out to attack people, but at the same time, we're definitely seeing that there is an us versus them kind of thing here. And so when I'm advising clients, cannabis clients, my advice would be get it all cleaned up. Do not risk it. And anyone you can talk to at Delta would tell you it's not worth the risk, right? Like they weren't even doing something that they knew was wrong and they still think it's not worth the risk.
Right. Rachel, was DCR looking to make an example of somebody and pick the wrong company?
It kind of feels like that. I don't want to speak for, their mindset and why they chose to go about this the way that they did, even as confusing as it is. Like, we're all speculating, all trying to figure it out. I don't know. But just adding on to what Leslie said, like, I'm so grateful we did as much as we did on the paperwork side. And it's kind of funny, like, I'm friends with a lot of the industry. Most of them don't have the level of paperwork that we have available. I'm so grateful.
I can attest to that.
I'm so grateful that QMS has made it into the current set of rules. Like that's how we knew about Focus. It's like that's my nerdy compliance side, but I'm excited to work with them because this should never happen to another business. And just adding on to what Leslie said, the industry just needs to be 10 times more proactive in defending and prioritizing compliance. This is a really fast industry, and I know it's really hard sometimes to get your managers and your bud tenders off the floor and get them to do their training and their logging, but none of your time spent on that matters if it's not logged. little things like that. And it's so interesting, the perspective that I've really gained from being under this microscope is all of that really does matter, because how else are you going to prove it? Um, and for real, like going back to what we talked about earlier, I'm not aware of a single facility in the state that this couldn't happen to. Um, but further, like I think the regulators and the industry, just as a whole, all of us, we need to take a moment for self-reflection as we assess how we got here and where we want to go next. Because what happened to us is a symptom of a confusing program, confusing guidance, confusing leadership. And it's not fair for licensees who work so hard. Like, I know you know how crazy the application process is, standing up, getting it commenced. It's an ordeal and it's expensive. Everyone is vulnerable, and all that time, it matters. It doesn't have to be like this anymore. Like, we can do better, and we should, for those 16,000 Missourians out there. Like, it's so funny. Like, I worked in and around the state capitol for about a decade, if not longer. And I remember getting all the press releases that, there's a new fabricators company, 12 new employees. The Missouri cannabis industry has over 15,000 new employees, and I haven't seen a press release. And it's crazy because we are the largest, fastest growing industry in this state. We should be treated with a little bit more respect.
Well, send them to me and we'll make sure the numbers get published.
Thank you. We need a press
release. Well, thank you both very much for taking the time today. I want to give you the opportunity as to if either of you have a final thought. Rachel, I'll start with you. Is there anything else that you want to make sure the Cannabis Equipment News audience either knows about yourself, Delta Extraction, or the situation in Missouri?
I really do think it's I know there's a lot of attention always on markets. I work with a lot of investors who are always looking for opportunities. I think anyone looking at the state of Missouri needs to review the JCAR hearing this past week. There's been a lot of coverage, and it's really easy to see between the lines where there's opportunity for improvement and what needs to be done to protect ourselves as operators, as employees. It sucks to learn the lesson like this, but I really hope we're all better for it. And I can't wait to see what's next, because like the biggest lesson that I've learned, especially from working with so many cannabis investors specifically, is there's always another opportunity. There's always an opportunity for improvement, and that's okay. What happened to Delta Extraction? Not okay at all. And it's so interesting. Like, there's a lot of people in the industry who do know me. There's a lot who do not. I've had a front row seat to regulatory interactions for over a decade. This isn't normal, even in the state of Missouri that likes to be a little bit wonky. We like to be entertaining. You never know what Missouri man's going to do next. But it doesn't have to be like this. And it has been awful. I've seen the mental and physical health of our leaders just degrade from this. It hurts. It's physically hurting leaders. And that really is just a shame to see. But it also shows how passionate people are and how much we really do care.
Leslie, before we get out of here, do you have any other final thoughts or anything else in particular you want to make sure the CEN audience knows about Focus or the situation in Missouri?
So I think one thing that's important to make sure that we continue to bring into this conversation is that hemp-derived cannabinoids are a national problem. There isn't a single state that isn't like dealing with this and struggling with dealing with it. We did a webinar last week, Cannabis Synthetics 101, for regulators, and had over 800 registrants, all regulatory folks. So there is an issue in our country that has to be resolved. It's not going to be resolved in Missouri. It's not going to be resolved in Arizona or Pennsylvania. It's going to be resolved federally. Part of that issue that nobody wants to talk about publicly, because it's like, oh my gosh, did we really legalize marijuana and not hemp, is that cannabis is the same plant. And once we get past all this old stigma as a country and regulatory agencies and all this, and say, it's all cannabis. There's THC levels at this high and this high and this high. And based on those levels, they need different regulatory pathways based on the end products. I compare it to corn. Corn grows in the field and it's an agricultural crop. The USDA regulates it. But if it's going to go into ethanol, it's going to go under EPA, right? If it's cornflakes or corn syrup, it's FDA. If it's penicillin. So I think we need to get there with cannabis as a whole and stop trying to talk about marijuana versus hemp. And if we had that sensibility right now, none of this could have happened anyway.
Well, thank you very much, both of you, for joining me. I really do appreciate the insight. And as we learn more coming out of Missouri, please reach out so we can share it with our viewers, readers, and listeners.
Awesome. Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
All right. For Leslie Engelking and Rachel Herndon, COO with Delta Extraction, I'm David Banty. This is Cannabis Equipment News.